Our grandparents knew their gardens inside and out, and they also knew which plants could cause more harm than good. Some were deadly poisons hidden in plain sight, while others were invasive bullies that took over the land. Over time, many of these plants earned such a bad reputation that families warned their children never to grow them. Today, we're counting down 20 plants that look innocent enough but carried risks our grandparents never forgot. Potato. You might be thinking, potato? No way! But yes, our grandparents often reminded us that while the tuber below ground is safe and nourishing, the rest of the plant can be dangerous. The leaves, stems, and even green skin on the potato itself contain solanine, a natural toxin. In large amounts, it causes nausea, headaches, and in severe cases, even more serious health problems. Families learn to store potatoes carefully away from light to prevent them from turning green and to never cook the tops or leaves. During hard times, every bite of food mattered, but they knew this plant had to be treated with caution. The potato saved lives, but only when you ate the right part. Peppermint. Peppermint might surprise you on this list. After all, it's one of the most familiar flavors in candies, teas, and toothpaste. But our grandparents often warned that even safe plants could cause trouble when grown carelessly. In large amounts, peppermint oil can be toxic, especially to pets like cats and dogs, sometimes leading to seizures or worse. Beyond that, peppermint is an aggressive spreader in the garden. Once planted, it sends runners underground, quickly taking over whole patches of soil. Families who valued tidy, productive gardens knew better than to let them loose without control. While it had its uses in medicine and flavoring, peppermint was never a plant you planted casually. It was one you handled with care. Poison hemlock. At first glance, poison hemlock looks harmless, with delicate white flowers that resemble Queen Anne's lace. But every part of this plant is loaded with deadly alkaloids. Just a small amount could cause paralysis, respiratory failure, and death. Our grandparents knew the stories, and this was the very plant said to have ended the life of Socrates centuries ago. By the 20th century, it had already spread across America, popping up in fields, ditches, and even near homesteads. Farmers taught their children to recognize its smooth, spotted stems and steer clear. Growing it in a garden wasn't just discouraged, it was dangerous. One wrong step with this plant could be a fatal mistake, and everyone back then knew it. Milkweed. To most, milkweed was just another wild plant with tall stalks and pods that burst open with silky fluff. But our grandparents knew better than to treat it lightly. The white sap that gives milkweed its name contains toxic compounds called cardiac glycosides, the same type of chemicals found in deadly plants like foxglove. Livestock that grazed on it could suffer poisoning, and even pets weren't safe. Old stories passed down included tales of animals falling sick and even dying after eating their leaves. Families warned children not to play with the pods or touch the sap. While certain varieties were later cultivated for butterflies, back then, milkweed was one of those plants you never brought near the garden. Wisteria. With cascading purple blooms, Wisteria is one of the most breathtaking vines you'll ever see. But our grandparents knew that beauty came at a price. This plant is invasive, climbing trees, fences, and even buildings, strangling whatever stands in its way. Once rooted, it's incredibly difficult to remove, with woody vines that twist and thicken over time. Worse still, its seeds and pods are toxic if ingested, posing risks to children and pets. Many families admired its blossoms from afar, but warned against planting it near homes. A garden that once looked charming could quickly become a battle zone against a vine that refused to stop growing. Wisteria earned a spot on the never plant list for good reason. Honeyvine. It looked harmless enough with heart-shaped leaves and clusters of pale flowers, but Honeyvine was another plant our grandparents warned about. Every part of it is considered toxic, containing chemicals that can make people and animals very ill. In some regions, it spread quickly, climbing fences, trees, and hedges, twining itself into anything it could reach. Its innocent appearance often fooled the unwary, but families understood the risks. Children were told never to taste the vines or berries, no matter how tempting they looked. The danger wasn't dramatic, like hogweed burns or hemlock poison, but it was serious enough to keep it off any sensible garden list. Honeyvine was trouble disguised in greenery. Lily of the valley, delicate bell-shaped flowers, and a sweet fragrance made the lily of the valley a favorite in old-fashioned bouquets. But our grandparents understood the warning behind its beauty. The entire plant is laced with cardiac glycosides, compounds that disrupt the heart's rhythm. Swallowing even a small amount of its berries, leaves, or stems could bring dizziness, nausea, and worse. Children were often tempted by its pretty red berries, which made it even more dangerous. Gardeners eventually learned the hard truth: this plant wasn't safe around pets or people. For many families, its dangers outweighed its charms. So while it stayed popular in floral arrangements, growing it in the yard was something grandparents warned strictly against: giant hogweed. You might think it's just another tall wildflower, but our grandparents knew better. Giant hogweed is beautiful at first glance, with towering stalks and umbrella-shaped blooms that can reach 14 feet high. But hidden inside its sap is a danger that's almost invisible. When it touches skin and reacts with sunlight, it causes severe burns, painful blisters, and scars that can last for years. Children were especially warned to stay away, since even brushing against the leaves could mean trouble. In some places, it spread like wildfire, taking over fields and riverbanks, leaving both land and people scarred. This was one plant families didn't just avoid growing, they avoided touching altogether. Monkshood, wolfsbane. Tall spikes of purple-blue flowers made monkshood a striking sight, but our grandparents knew it carried a sinister reputation. Also called wolfsbane, this plant was steeped in folklore as both a poison and a weapon. Every part of it contains aconitine, a powerful toxin that can cause tingling, paralysis, and death. Even brushing against the sap could numb the skin. Stories of poisoned arrows dipped in monkshood weren't just legend. Its danger was real. Families knew to admire it from afar, but never plant it where children or animals might wander. As beautiful as it looked in bloom, monkshood's dark history and very real risks made it one of the most feared plants in any garden. Quinoa. Today, quinoa is praised as a modern superfood, but our grandparents knew another side of it. While the seeds are edible and nutritious when properly prepared, the plant itself contains saponins, bitter compounds that can irritate the stomach if not carefully washed away. Families in the past were cautious, warning that eating unprepared quinoa could cause nausea or discomfort. Even the leaves can carry oxalates, which in excess are harmful. Beyond that, quinoa's ability to spread made it something of a nuisance in smaller gardens, where it could easily outcompete other crops. What many people see now as trendy and healthy was once treated with caution. Our grandparents didn't see it as harmless. They saw it as risky, and they were right. Oleander. Oleander was once admired for its lush green leaves and fragrant, colorful blooms. Many saw it as a perfect ornamental shrub. But in truth, every part of this plant is poisonous. Leaves, flowers, stems, even the smoke when burned. Our grandparents knew the risks. Livestock that nibbled on it often died, and people who handled it carelessly could become very ill. Oleander's toxins attack the heart, and even small amounts can be deadly. Despite its beauty, families learned to keep it out of reach, and eventually out of their gardens entirely. It was a classic case of looks being deceiving. This was one plant you might admire from afar, but our grandparents knew better than to grow it. Grandma would say, "This is the one green you should never trust." Root beer plant. Here's one you might not expect, the root beer plant, also known as sassafras. For years, its roots and leaves flavored drinks, candies, and teas. But our grandparents warned against overuse because the leaves and roots contain saffrole, a compound later discovered to be toxic and potentially cancer-causing in large amounts. In the 20th century, saffrole was even banned as a food additive. Families back then may not have had the science, but they knew from experience that too much sassafras could make you sick. Children were often told not to chew on the leaves or drink too much homemade root beer. It was another reminder that not everything that smells sweet and familiar is safe to grow or consume. Deadly nightshade. The very name says it all. Our grandparents recognized it by its dark, glossy berries and bell-shaped purple flowers. Tempting to children, but toxic through and through, belladonna contains alkaloids that can cause blurred vision, convulsions, and death. Centuries earlier, it had been misused as a poison and even as a cosmetic, but by the Depression era, families taught strict caution. Stories of livestock deaths and sickened children were enough to keep it out of most gardens. Despite its sinister history, it still managed to spread in hedgerows and wild spaces, often unnoticed until it was too late. This was one of the most infamous plant families passed down warnings about. Beautiful, but deadly. Siberian Elm. At first, the Siberian elm was praised as a hardy, fast-growing tree, a quick fix for shade and windbreaks. But our grandparents learned its reputation the hard way. Though it grew quickly, its wood was brittle, and branches often snapped in storms, posing dangers near homes or barns. On top of that, it spread aggressively, producing countless seeds that invaded fields, gardens, and fence lines. What seemed like a solution quickly became a problem, leaving families with weak, messy trees that were more trouble than they were worth. Grandparents warned against planting it because once established, it was nearly impossible to manage. It wasn't a tree to be trusted, it was one to be avoided. Rosary Pea. Pretty seeds can sometimes hide the darkest dangers. The rosary pea, with its shiny red and black beads, was once used in jewelry, rosaries, and even children's crafts. But our grandparents knew to keep it far from the garden, because inside those seeds is one of the most lethal toxins known to man. Abrin. Just one chewed seed could be fatal. Even handling them carelessly carried risks if the seed coat cracked. Families warned their children never to play with or grow this plant, no matter how attractive it looked. Its reputation was more than a folklore, it was fact. For generations, the rosary pea was seen less as a decorative curiosity and more as a deadly mistake waiting to happen. Russian olive. The Russian olive was another plant that fooled people with its beauty. Its silvery leaves and fragrant yellow flowers made it attractive, but behind that charm lurked a very invasive tree. Once planted, it spread rapidly, crowding out native vegetation and depleting soil nutrients. Worse, its sharp thorns posed risks to livestock and children. Farmers quickly realized it took over fields and riverbanks where its dense thickets choked out useful plants. While it provided some shade and even edible berries, the negatives far outweighed the benefits. Families warned their children never to plant it near home gardens because it was almost impossible to get rid of once it spread. Russian olive was beautiful with a hidden cost. Jimsonweed, datura. Jimsonweed, sometimes called devil's snare, was another plant our grandparents firmly warned against. Its large, spiny seed pods and trumpet-shaped flowers might look striking, but behind that, beauty lies a cocktail of toxic alkaloids. Consuming it, even accidentally, can lead to delirium, hallucinations, seizures, and sometimes death. During hard times, some desperate people tried to use it as medicine or even experimented with it as food, often with tragic results. Animals weren't safe either. Livestock that grazed on Jimsonweed frequently fell sick. It grew aggressively in fields and gardens, spreading seeds far and wide, which made it even harder to control. For families who valued safety, Jimsonweed wasn't just unwanted, it was feared, and for all the right reasons too. Japanese knotweed. At first, Japanese knotweed was admired for its bamboo-like stems and sprays of tiny white flowers. But it didn't take long for families to realize they had welcomed a relentless invader. Its roots pushed deep underground, breaking through concrete, roadbeds, and even house foundations. Once established, it spread aggressively, overwhelming gardens and pastures alike. Our grandparents learned to keep their distance because once it appeared, it never left without a fight. Even a small fragment of root could start a whole new colony. Its resilience made it infamous, and warnings spread quickly. Never plant knotweed, no matter how pretty it looks in bloom. This was one guest in the garden that refused to leave. Kudzu. It started as a so-called miracle vine, introduced for erosion control and even promoted as livestock forage. But our grandparents quickly learned that Kudzu was less of a helper and more of a takeover artist. With vines that could grow a foot a day in warm weather, it smothered crops, choked trees, and swallowed barns and fences in green waves. Once rooted, it was nearly impossible to control. Farmers cursed its relentless spread, and the families warned against planting it anywhere near home gardens. What looked like a hardy solution became a nightmare, turning fertile land into useless thickets. Kudzu earned its reputation as the vine that ate the South, and with good reason. White snakeroot. White snakeroot looks harmless with clusters of small white flowers, but its reputation was deadly. In the 1800s and beyond, cattle that grazed on it produced milk sickness, passing toxins into their milk and meat. Entire families fell ill, and history even records it as the cause of Abraham Lincoln's mother's death. By the Depression era, farmers knew the plant had to be rooted out wherever animals grazed. They warned their children never to touch or taste it. What seemed like an ordinary weed carried a poison that crept quietly into the food supply. Our grandparents treated white snakeroot not just as a nuisance, but as a real threat to their survival. Some were deadly, others just plain destructive, but all carried lessons that still matter today. Which of these would you keep far away from your garden? Or have you seen any of them growing wild near you? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more timeless garden wisdom. See you in the next video.